Alright, well, you'll have to excuse me first of all for like spending an entire month to make the third video. But this video is gonna be a little bit intense. As you can see in front of you, I have like a bunch of Runick lists to talk about. Actually, there are about like 10 other variants or so that I personally developed that I ended up deleting. This tier list ranges from top tier, which is the best variants that you can play, into good decks. This is me from the editing, so basically the difference between top tier and good decks is that they are basically format dependent. It is basically interchangeable. Playable, which is they actually have a solid gimmick, if you will. And then you have functional, which is just Runick that can work. Then Dysfunctional, which is something that you're really stretching for. And then we have good memes, which is self-explanatory and no. So yeah, it's if you see something on no, that's just something that I'm not even gonna talk about. There's just not enough time for it. And luckily for us, I have planned out like 20 of them just to be placed into the no. I guess some of the things that are worth talking about is that I have all the stun variants all stacked up here, except for one, because like you should not be playing stun, let's be real. Runick Plants is not a real deck, Runick Exodia is not, Runick Malice is a thought deck.
Brother, what's that? What's that, brother?
This deck is not real, this deck is an FTK that is not real, this deck is non-functional, this is a gimmick. But actually it's a decent gimmick, like it's a funny gimmick. Imagine Runick Time Lords FTK. But speaking of which, Thought deck, Stun deck, Thought deck, Brick City. Something that we don't talk about, yes. And now we move on to the good memes, which is just... So this is basically a bunch of things that... I mean, I guess it's just funny, you know, like who wouldn't enjoy some Runick Nouvelle, you know? And this is like the most consistent FTK I've ever made. This list is funny. These are all like funny in my opinion. Either funny or like very gimmicky and just overall look aesthetically nice, if you will. Oh, okay, so we're finished with the good memes as well. So let's move on to the... Dysfunctional lists. So when it comes to dysfunctional lists, I'm gonna explain them a little bit as we move on. Runick Lightsworn, a Brick City, so you should not be playing it. Too little on engine space. This one is even worse. This is like bad Ryziel at this point. This one just has too much engine requirement for both of them. Like you go up to 50 and you barely have a functional deck regardless. This is just a gimmick, but functional. Almost functional. This is too old of an engine to play with Runick. This is too big of an engine to play with Runick. And this list is non-functional until you get the 3 back to 3. This list is non-functional because it's a trap deck. This list is... This one too inconsistent with how you wanna sort out your gimmicks. So like, one gimmick requires you to not have spells and traps, and the other gimmick is purely spells. So yeah, you know, you can't like have nice things when you play this deck. This list is just 6 normal summons that are hand trap magnets, so no. Like honestly, yeah, where is it? Like just don't play this. This is just a straight up no. You're gonna get hand trap and then you're gonna cry about it, honestly. And with this having been said, this is where we move on to the functional list, and this is where I'm gonna explain them a little bit more. And starting off with Runick Cartesia Fusion. So like this is a Cartesia Fusion pile, but the duality target here is between these two. So like switching between the card that draws and pops and then the Raigeki that burns. This is like the main gimmick of it. And like you have the Cartesia draw and the Cartesia way to dodge an Impermon Yugen. So like it is functional, but like it's really gimmicky and really dependent on its gimmick. Runick Resonator is a deck that has 9 discards, I think. Like it has like 9 ways to discard a card for Yugen, on top of having a decent normal summon, you know. So like it has its own gimmicks, it's kind of consistent, it has a decent amount of non-engine, but the end board is just too bad. who cares about you having a draw one with like a black coat labs in the graveyard? That's basically the end board. It's not a good list, honestly. This one, I tried making it, but like, despite it having fantastic specs in everything, honestly, it just sort of doesn't come together. This one is just a gimmick, honestly. I don't know why it's even here. This one, I tried it, and like, it's just 6 normal summons, so it really just does not work. This one is just a bad version of the Runick Chimera list that I'm gonna talk about later. But like, as you can see, between the Runick Chimera that's gonna be here and the Runick branded that is here, it just sort of comes down, evened out into a functional list. But like, honestly, don't play it. There's better ways to go into the Chimera stuff. And up next we have one of my favorite lists in Runick Bestial Agents. So this is the deck that I got inspired into making, and obviously this is an original, after the Joshua Schmidt list, so like the Runick Quem list, the Runick Synchro Quem. I have a list for here that I'm gonna show off, just because like this is like almost one of the first original decks that I created outside of like Runick Water and other quack. But this is an actually decent list, at least it was at the time, and then it was an original, hence why like it's one of my favorites, honestly. But at the end of the day, it's just 6 normal summons with 5 9-engine pieces, 6. So it's just not good enough in 2024 standards anymore. So like, I think it's more so like this, yeah. Just because like the agent engine, when it comes together, it really comes together. It has a lot of synergies, it has a lot of interactions, and layered plays that like resist hand traps. Just need to open the 6 of. Runick Hero is a decent list just because it has a lot of discards. Like, it has a decent normal summon and just an easy access into its end boards like the Floodgate Macrocosmos. So overall it is a functional and nice list, but I personally just never experimented with it. So if you want to experiment with this, maybe with like the Fiend Smith engine as well, and feel free to try it. But up next we have the Runick Plunder Patrol, which is just functional at best and in the middle of functional, just because it's format dependent. So if the format is decent, which is what it is now for the deck, you just sort of can get it to be playable. But overall this is sort of slowing down and going down in the tier list. Like, bit by bit it used to be here in the good decks, and it just slowly writhed its way down into the functional. The middle of functional even, it's not even at the top. Runick Striker is probably one of the better functional lists, because this deck has a lot of draw power and a lot of going second capacity, but it does require a good pilot and a bit of a decent maneuvering, if you will. Runick Tierlements, so this is Tierlements as a pure thing without the Fiend engine. If you know me, you know that I love my Fiendlements, but this is unfortunately just pure tier. And I would, yep, it's here with the functional. These are all sorted out, so like, spoiler alert, this is one of the best decks, these two. And then we're gonna continue on with the bad lists in a minute. So yeah, Runick tier, not really functional, because it doesn't really have a lot of synergy. You know, what's the reason to even play it? This is actually, okay. So this is another engine that I created, which is the Bestial Resonator. Colloquially, I call it Bestiator. So in this case, I actually decided to make the Bestiator engine mixed with the Thunder Dragons, just as a sort of way to banish out a Thunder Dragon from the graveyard with SP, and then try to wiggle your way into making a Colossus on the field. Which is a decent gimmick as an idea, with like a bit of a hero engine with a Fiend Smith engine just to mill 5. But overall, it's just not. Runick Water, this is one of the first original lists that I created way before the new support came out, like back in 2022 or something, like early 2022. Overall it was playable at the time, but nowadays it's just not functional, and with the new support it just, yeah, without the new support that's just not functional, and then with the support it just sort of comes out to being here in the middle, it's just not good anymore. you can slot in like an ice barrier engine with it, just to like give yourself a good discard. Runick with Fabled is something that I haven't tested post-support, but pre-support obviously it was not even, you just do not even play it. With the post-support, I guess it would be somewhere up here. Yeah, I guess it is functional, but like it's not fantastic, if you will. And finally we have the final bit of the functional lists, just because this is not the way that the deck is meant to be played anymore. So like this is Runick with Magic Musk, and you know how much I love my Musk, but even with going first and opening cast bar, they're just not a good idea to play. So as a Fiend Smith engine maybe, but like as a pure deck, it's just not good enough anymore. But it is at the top of functional, like maybe even playable. But we're gonna just put it here at the end of the day. You'll see why, like there's a lot better decks than this. And finally we're gonna move on to the playables. And this is where I start explaining, like this is where you're gonna see a little more of the list that I have. And starting off, we're gonna have Runick Fur Hire Sprite, and this is something that I have here. Shoutouts to all my furries. But, as you can see, it is a list that has very few non-engine spots, only 6. And that's not good. That's not good in today's meta. Like, the top deck in Runick, spoiler alert, has like 24 engine spots, non-engine spots, which is just, comparatively speaking, this is just whack here. And up next we are gonna skip over this one just until we get more of them. Yeah, we're gonna skip until we get more of them. Up next we have the Runick Dogmatica, which is in theory a functional list, but I don't know why it never came together with me. Like, it even feels strong when you play it, but it just sort of never functions. And I don't know why. Like, it has its own draws, it has synergy with the Cartesia engine, it has a floodgate in Winda. I don't know, it just never functioned. Runick Orchis is probably barely functional pre-support, and then it becomes playable with the support, but I never really tested those Link 1 and Link 4 that just newly came out. It depends on how, if I ever even try to play it. Like, I don't think I will. And overall it is something that just has a lot of non-engine space as well, but not a fantastic end board. And that's just the main reason why they are even like 2 tiers below the top, you know. Runick Ryziel is not something that would function in theory, just because the Ryziels have their own inherent lock from their special summoning method. So like most Runick decks most of the decks that you mix with Runick usually have their lock as an activated effect, so this is not something that can be done here. But there are better lists with Ryziel in it. But unfortunately, like a pure version of both, it just like even conflicts with the field spell. Like not even Runick with what is this, Centurion? Yeah, not even Runick with Centurion has that much anti-synergy, just because the Ryziel field spell is just crazy on its own. Runick Generator is just a lore deck, and overall it is just a fine deck as well. I have a list here, and from what I remember, it is a kind of a cope list. I mean, it has all this inconsistent engine only for the end value of like 12 engine spots, and that's like just not worth it, hence why it's just playable. That's just what 2024 is like in Yu-Gi-Oh! Runick with Goblin engine as a way to dodge a negate on Hugin, and then a Fiend Smith engine. There's just sort of not a real end board that you're making outside of Fiend Smith with this deck. So like that's why it's just at the middle of playable, honestly. It's gonna end up being in the middle of playable. This is more like it, yeah. Runick Primite with Fiend Smith is something that I never tested, but I would assume that it is playable, like somewhere around here. But like it's not fantastic overall. Runick Cartesia Fusion is a playable concept. As you can see, there were a lot of like Cartesia Fusion piles just before it, but just a simple Cartesia Fusion pile switching the Dranguinal into a Dragoon. And Runick Artesia, no, this is Runick Synchro. So like this is a Synchro variant, while this is a Fusion variant. Overall, I would say this is slightly worse than the Fusion pile, just purely off the fact that Quem is not really a good, it's not a good starter anymore. It's just a strictly worse Runick White Forest list at this point. So that gets us to another fusion pile that I have, whoopsie. And that fusion pile is, well, it's not a fusion pile, but it is Runick Chimera. And Runick Chimera is, it's decent. Like, it doesn't have a lot of non-engine space, hence why it's in the middle. Runick Punk with new support is like more so at the top of the playable. And probably even like towards the bottom of good decks. Just because it has like natural draws and monster negates and like a lot of consistency. And I think it even has a way to flip face down. There's probably a way to like slot in the Runick engine with the deck. Up next we have a Runick Square Claw deck. And also decent just because it's a rank 4 spam sort of pile and you can even play it with Fiend Smith and like Ryziel. I would probably even put it at the bottom of good decks, surprisingly. Just because like it's a really, it's like this list right here, but like almost strictly better, you know? But like, yeah, it's gonna be probably at the bottom of good decks. And spoiler alert, this list is also gonna be in the good decks. Runick Sprite is something that is not good enough anymore, you know? It's functional, but like without Elf, it's like just gonna slowly start losing its place in the tier list. Like, it's just gonna slowly start going down. Runick Tenpai is something that I made functional, but it is something that is technically playable with the gimmick that I created for it. You're gonna see the list. Do I have the list here though? I probably have it, yeah. And as you can see, it is sort of a reverse OTK deck. Like almost a pseudo FTK deck, if you can get the pieces going correctly. But it is a gimmick that functions. Runick, and this is Runick Cyber Spile. This used to be Runick Cyber Spiles, actually, and then it got switched into like a Fiend Smith with Magic Musk. Just because like, nowadays it's just better to make him a Fiend Smith. Or not even a Fiend Smith, you just make him a Magic Musk and get a free Light Fiend in the graveyard, or even summon a Light Fiend from the deck if you're going second. So like that's why it's like sort of at the more so at the top of playable. Yeah, Runick White Forest is up next with about 5,000 lists because I experimented with this deck for Runick. And starting off with the worst list is I think it's the Bestial Centurion that's the worst, just because it doesn't have a lot of space for non-engine. And then we have the Runick Centurion White Forest, and then we have the Runick White Forest with Bestials. So like, I mean, I guess it's a little bit redundant to have all three of these, huh? But at the end of the day, this is like how it sort of plays out. And actually more so like this, just because the Bestial engine is now good in this format, just because of the vast amount of Fiend Smith that you play. And overall, I would say that the best of the regular variants, the best of the good decks, is just a simple Runick White Forest without any sort of fluff. The regular Runick White Forest endboard is like a couple of Book of Eclipses, which is pretty fantastic in this format, first of all. And then second of all, it has a lot of space for non-engine as well, so like about 10 non-engine pieces, as well as like about 10 starters and like 16 Runick quick plays. But at the end of the day, it is susceptible to a lot of the high impact hand traps that are in this format, like Bestials and like there's Nibiru, and Fualos is obviously an FTK, even Peruli is an FTK, even Nayalis is an FTK. So like this deck loses to a lot of hand traps, like a lot of hand traps. And I think I have, well actually let me just get with the best variants of Runick White Forest, and this is the first on our top tier lists. And it is Runick White Forest with Cash. And the reason why it's at the top is just because setting up a unicorn at the start of your turn and then just using it as a hedge against hand traps, just to sort of rip away the Requiem in your opponent's extra deck. That's just kind of decent, you know? Or if you're playing against Malice and they only have one white binder in the extra and you rip it off, that's just almost an FTK against a lot of decks. I was even considering, like, just due to the fact that the cash monster is so good, I even considered playing Cherries in the main deck. So overall, I would say it is decent. It is even, I would argue, like closer to being in the top 3. But you'll see, there's like a lot of competition at the top tier. So this is with the Fiend Smith cards, but I haven't named it correctly. It has, like, as you can see, like 11 non-engine spots. More so 12, yeah, this is 12. So this is Runick White Forest Fiend Smith, and this is Runick White Forest Bestial, which has 3, 4, 7 non-engine spots, technically. You can cut this down and, like, add more. Runick White Forest Bestial. This is the Runick White Forest Cache. As you can see, it has 8 non-engine spots, actually, but, like, it's replaced with a lot of Kashtira. And honestly, why wouldn't you? Like, the Kashtira engine is just that broken in this format. I would honestly highly recommend this. It is at the top of the tier. It is at the top of the top tier for a reason. At least for a moment. Are there any other lists? Runick White Wing? Okay, I have another White Forest Fiend Smith list. Okay. Ooh. No, we don't talk about that. Oh, we don't talk about that even more. Jesus. Okay, we're gonna talk about these later. But Runick Cache? Still Agent Generator. Okay, I showed off everything basically except for the meme deck with the Bromancers. Okay. Just like showing off some of the things that I haven't shown off yet. Runick Tenpai, I showed it, yep. Okay, so then back to the tier list. It is with the Runick Primite up next. Runick Primite is a decent list. It has a decent amount of non-engine and a decent side engine for Runick, but the biggest problem is that while this engine is decent with Runick, just because it's like self-dependent and recursive, and like decent at the end of the day, like strong, but it's only a 6-7 unfortunately, so like I would argue it's even at the playable even. Runick Fiend Smith with Ryziel and Magic Musk. That's a lot of engine, you know, but surprisingly it's just like 40 card list and with even a decent amount of non-engine space, if I could even find it. I think it might be this one. No, this is an experimental list that I haven't even featured on the tier list actually. But like there is a list somewhere for it. Smith's pile? Yeah, this is it, yep. Okay, so it has 9 non-engine spots with 16 quick plays and like 4 Ryziel starters, which is honestly decent. It even has like an actual ad for Engraver. So this is a good deck for a reason, you know. It has decent non-engine, it has a decent combo at the end of the day. You just overlay like the Magic Musk cards into the Duo Drive to get your combo going, the Ryziel combo. Runick Centurion is a functional list. It's a decent list. Like I would argue that Primera is the best level 4 normal summon right now, just because it has like a bit of a better resistance to hand traps. And I think it even has a lot of non-engine space. And when it comes to the bestial variants of Runick Centurion, it's just technically a worse list. Like it's basically just getting the regular Centurion list and just weighing it down with Runick, which is, I mean, it can make the deck a little bit more functional in some ways. And Runick Fiend Limits, finally we're talking about something that we haven't talked about and we should be talking about. As you can see, this deck has like 9 discards for Runick with like a lot of synergy as well. I mean, overall it is kind of crazy if you think about it. Like even if, especially if you even mix it up with like a Fiend Smith engine, this deck is kind of crazy. This deck is easily deserving of being in the middle of good decks. I would even argue it's like this, yeah. Or even this. This is as good as tier can get until we get the Kitkalos and Merlian banned. But until then, the original Runick tier deck, it is unfortunately something that will never see the light of day again. It was crazy at the time. That was a crazy time. And speaking of crazy, it is a deck that has almost 10 non-engine spots, and I mean overall it remains a decent deck to this day. It's just a simple Runick bestiary list. It has decent synergy with a like a little bit of a Fiend Smith engine. It has a lot going for it. So overall I would consider this a I mean, you can even slot in Centurion with it, if you can believe it even. Yeah, this list is crazy. Like, it's at the top of the good decks for a reason. Runick Cash, I mean, it's just Runick Cash. We talked about how good Cash is. I would even put it here. Runick Fiend Smith is actually a bit of a fake here. It barely deserved to be at the bottom of Playable. And I guess now we talk about... No, we're not going to talk about those. Yeah. And speaking of Runick Fiend Smith, this is the Runick Fiend Smith Sprite list. I mean, like at the end of the day, this is like a decent payoff for the Sprite engine being mixed with Runick now that Elf is banned. So overall, it does remain as a decent option just because I think it has like 9 non-engine spots as well. On top of like playing the regular 15 Runicks and 10 Sprites or whatnot. So overall, it is decent. There's better ways to play the Fiend Smith pile, but this is one of the better ways to play the Fiend Smith with Runick. I will admit that much. Runick Sprite with Cash is significantly worse, I would say, but like, it is Cash at the end of the day, so maybe like this. Yeah, honestly. Maybe like this, yeah. No, you don't deserve to be this far. And I guess now we talk about the reason why I changed Fountain into Tip for the last few lists. So this is the concept that I sort of, I mean a quote-unquote concept, but this is the idea that I sort of talk about often, that is called Runick list. And the basic idea is pretty simple. You just sort of, if you look at a Runick list, like for example, this list for example, the Runick list Fur Hire, you can see that like the basic idea of it, actually this list doesn't portray it well. Like the basic idea of the deck is that you play sort of like 12 non-engine, 12 quick plays at most when it comes to Runick list. So like the overall Runick engine is like 14 to 12 usually, instead of like the 18 to 20 that is like a standard a few years now, or was a standard. Especially if you play it as Runick list as possible. You run a lot of non-engine space naturally. So like you can see how I run 9 non-engines at the moment, and you can easily like sub in a few Fiend Smith for the 3 spots here, and then it ends up with like 12 non-engine spots at the end of it. And that's the power of Runick list overall. It just has a lot of non-engine space, and if you play it as Runick as possible, like while it is Runick list and 12 quick plays at the end of the day, if you try to play it as Runick as you can, it just sort of works, you know? But it is something more mentally draining and a little bit more challenging when it comes to the skill requirement. So yeah, they are just like, if you ever see a Runick list and a Runick list of the same exact archetypes, someone who has experience with Runick would get better results out of a Runick list. When it comes to that, everything that is Runick list is basically the equivalent of the Runick list, but just 1 tier above basically. It's just 1 tier above. It's just, you play it Runick list, you lose a few Runicks, and then your deck just instantly gets better. Simple as that. So like the Runick list Sprite list, it just has more non-engine space. Why not? Runick list Fur Hire just has more non-engine space, or you can add a 4th engine like Bestials. Why not? Runick list Sprite Hire is just an insane amount of non-engine that is Bestials, and you just basically destroy Fiend Smith with that. Yeah. And this is even... Okay, this is not a Runick list, but we are gonna talk about those at the end. Actually, since we're close to finishing, I guess we could talk about those right now. So this is what I consider to be, of the standard variants, to be like arguably the best variant. Like it's a really tough competition between these two, as far as like things that has consistent output and consistent results. Like I have been experimenting with this list a little bit in Rated recently, and I haven't been sort of liking it. Or not this list, but this list. And I haven't been liking it a lot. So I haven't experimented with this list. And as I said, this is Runick list Spriteator compared to the Runick Spriteator list. Mentioned them before, and I do have a list here. In fact, this is the Runick Spriteator list. So like the benefit of this is that, as you can see, it has like space for 12 non-engines on top of like being a decent amount of Runick lists in a Runick list deck. Because like some Runick list lists, as you can see in like the list that's gonna be featured in like a few moments, there's like a few Runick list lists that only have like 10 Runick cards in total. And that's like, that really just sort of hampers down the deck at some point. It really just pushes it down. It is something that I would consider like arguably at the top of the Runick list, at the top of the Runick charts and even the Runick list charts. You just cannot go wrong with this list in particular, just because it has basically everything that you want. Fantastic list. And this is obviously original. Like a lot of the lists that you see are original at the end of the day, like only a few lists that I have net deck. But at the end of the day, this is going to be the final list that we're gonna talk about. This is, as you can see, a Runick list with Fiend Smith, Bestials, and then Hop-Ear Squadron. And this is something that I have been experimenting with just to like try and see which of these three decks are like the best at performing in this meta the moment. And it really is a toss-up at the end of the day, because this list is fantastic, the Runick White Forest Kashtira list. It is fantastic at going first and resisting hand traps. This is an overall decent list for like sort of just encompassing the rogue and then the Runick list hand trap sort of list that I'm gonna show in a minute is just a really experimental thing that I've been trying against Fiend Smith Ryziel in particular. We're gonna see the list in a few seconds. It does run 13 Runicks technically in 46. It's like sort of comes down to being about 11 Runicks in 40, or like maybe 12. But as you can see, like the main benefit of this is that you blind second with this to like sort of blank out the Tenpai matchup. Not that Tenpai is a big problem for the deck, but and then you play just 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 16, 18, 21, 24 hand traps going second in 46, which just sort of like balance out to being about 22 hand traps. And so like you are consistently going to be able to pull up with like 3 hand traps every game. Going second, that's like crazy. And the reason why you even like blind second with this deck in the first place is that with the amount of hand traps that you're playing, you are going to be able to guaranteed stop the opponent from playing. But at the end of the day, they are not going to be able to attack you to like clear up your board. And the other benefit is that you get a 6 draw from the game mechanics. This sort of approach just sort of balances itself out to being almost like a Runick deck. Decent amount of engine and like some amount of benefit. Like a decent amount of engine from Runick, decent amount of engine from the non-Runicks. Just because any 2 bodies just become a Fiend Smith card, you know. And it has draws, it has counterplays, it stops the opponent, it sometimes kills the engine of the opponent. So it's something that I've been experimenting with, and I have not really made consistent results with it, admittedly. But like it's still on my radar, and I'm still like experimenting with it to this day. I entered an Iron Man actually with it and lost on round 1, surprisingly. And that is basically the tier list, as you can see. I think I also like sort of balanced it out into being some... To some extent, I balanced the position of the decks to sort of portray how good they are actually into the meta in this format. This list that you see right here is just what I wanted to show off, just in general, if you want to take a look at my template of a Runick. So this is the template that I have for Runick. Anytime I want to start a new list that like I don't have a consistent idea for, I just sort of look at this list, copy it, and then just sort of clear out whichever things I don't want. For example, I probably don't want like these cards, you know? I just want to add this, for example, this. Maybe I want to add this for a go second deck, add a few hand trap, that sort of thing. This is like the basic idea of this list. I just wanted to show off the template. And that is gonna wrap it up for the first tier list that I have. The second one that I'm gonna talk about is something real quick. This is as you can see, this is sort of an assortment of lists that I have talked about. And these lists all share one thing in common, and that is that I won a daily tournament in, or I topped a Swiss tournament in, or I won a Swiss tournament in as well. So like these are all tournament winners that won me actual money. And this money is like $2 at the end of the day, which is just crazy amount if you think about it. $2 for like 3 hours of work. But yeah, these, like some of these, like we don't talk about, you know? We don't talk about the Amorphage incident or the... Oh, I don't have it here, but like Nouvelle is even here. So yeah, we're just gonna pretend that this didn't happen. We're just gonna pretend that I didn't commit war crimes. And overall, I would say that this basically covers everything that I wanted to talk about. And this is me from the editing here to tell you that I will not look at the third and fourth tier lists that I wanted to create, because they are just a waste of time now that I talked about all of that. You'll have to excuse old me because I was busy at the time. That was before I started going to school on top of working. But like I still had a lot of things to do. So yeah, now that this has all been said and done, thank you all so much for watching, and look forward to my next video, which will probably be rather quick because it's not gonna be that difficult to produce. So yeah, take care everybody.